It is the ultimate prize of political power in Kenya, State House. This is both the symbol and home of the Kenyan presidency. So vicious are the contests for political power in Kenya. It is a blood sport that finds its roots in an ugly fallout between two of Kenya's eminent founding fathers, Jomo Kenyatta and Oginga Odinga. When Mzee Jomo Kenyatta, the first president of Kenya, took the oath of office, a nation of 8 million Kenyans was oblivious of the clashing currents that characterized the Cold War between the Western world fronted by the United States of America and the Eastern Bloc that revolved around the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, USSR. Former Cabinet Minister Burudi Nabwera was Kenya's first ambassador to the United States. He was a key player in ensuring Kenya related well with the most powerful man on the planet. His job began several months before Kenya's independence as Jomo Kenyatta and Jaramogi Oginga Odinga ignited passions among Kenyans.
Before that, and even moving into the elections and after the elections, the Jaramogi was definitely the undisputed deputy of Mzee Kenyatta, and they liked each other and they worked very closely, and whatever they did they shared. So Jaramogi had a lot of influence, like the appointment of cabinet, appointment of various ones. The target for Kanu then was to try and discourage tribalism and build a nation.
But predictably and barely 3 years after independence, Jaramogi Oginga Odinga tendered his resignation. He had resolved to relinquish his position as vice president. A vicious fight in the post-independence Kenya had reached a point of no return for the man later to be called the doyen of opposition politics in Kenya. At the time of resignation, Oginga Odinga claimed that the government was in the hands of masters serving foreign interests.
I came to know Mzee Kenyatta by being introduced by Jaramogi and friends.
Indeed, Jomo Kenyatta towered among Kenyans agitating for change. He was much older than his freedom struggle colleagues, but also oozed the air of a de facto leader in the group, complete with unmatched presence. He was the symbol for resistance.
Some of them have misunderstood us, and it's only by our action they will know that we mean business.
He's capable, he's completely well informed, and I am satisfied with him.
He was, as a result, the unchallenged pick for all leaders, including Jaramogi Oginga Odinga, who rejected an offer by the colonial masters that would have made him the first prime minister of a self-governing Kenya. Not swayed by the royalty of being the first among equals, a whisk-displaying Oginga Odinga instead demanded that for independence to be realized, Jomo Kenyatta had to be released.
Jomo Kenyatta is the father of the African nationalism and the African national movement in this country.
But surely you're all rather more advanced than he is in your thinking about politics. Wouldn't he embarrass you if he was really let go now?
We cannot in any sense be more advanced than our teacher and master.
Kenyatta, now under restriction, had been moved to Lodwar, still in the harsh conditions of northern Kenya. He was joined by his fourth wife, Ngina, and was allowed occasional visits.
Jaramogi, with the other African members, asked the colonial government to allow them to visit Mzee Kenyatta So they discuss politics and the future of the country.
Election in 1961 brought in an African majority in the Legislative Council for the first time, but until Kenyatta was released, the leading party, KANU, refused to participate in the government.
And after the Jaramogi had joined the Legislative Council with Wakina Ngala and Akina Maside Mulironi, President Moi and Ronald Ngala, the question of Kenyatta came up in the parliament. And Jaramogi stood up and said, unless and until Mzee Kenyatta was released to lead the African people, it would be very difficult for the Africans to accept another person as a leader of Kenya. The majority of African people, Mzee Jomo Kenyatta was their second god.
And Uhuru Kenyatta meant that Kenya should attain its independence after the release of Jomo Kenyatta and the other fighters that had been imprisoned with him in Kapenguria and elsewhere.
All the year. I was in Parliament in 1963. That's when I was elected first in Parliament.
On August the 14th, 1961, Kenyatta came home.
They had now to work hard to know Kenyatta's views when he's released. Kenyatta told him he will be no different. He has been always the Kenyatta. They know. But the settlers said they wanted to hear directly from him. So there is for a meeting in Nakuru. And of course, Kenyatta didn't refuse. He went there.
When do you want independence for Kenya? Today. What means are you ready to adopt to achieve independence? Constitutional means.
At an age estimated to be above 70, Jomo Kenyatta became Kenya's first prime minister and a year later, first president. The Swahili word for pulling together Harambee, which had Indian origins, became Mzee Kenyatta's unity idea for the new nation. Kenyatta wasted little time in exerting his authority while showcasing his style of doing things.
And at that time, the relationship between him and Kenyatta was fantastic. They carried a fly whisk. They were both wearing the beaded caps.
I think I'm 95 years now.
Dr. Charles Rubia was Nairobi's African mayor a year before independence.
Precious segregation was there. This area, for example, was only for Europeans, where we are now.
But the newly independent Kenya would quickly fall into the trap of vicious ideological tussle known as the Cold War.
And people like in Africa were being tossed up and down by the world powers. I think in our case, you see, Jaramogi Odinga was very close to the Chinese and the communists. And the Western world, America and Britain and so on, were against communists. This powerful nation, the Western countries, were led by the Americans, and the Eastern countries by the Soviet Union, and now China, sort of forced the world to be in two groups, so you had to be with one or the other. But Kenya had declared that we were non-aligned, and those are the instructions for us as ambassadors. That's what we explained. But meanwhile, their ambassadors were busy in the host capitals. Like here, we had a very active American ambassador called William Atwood. They're very, very busy. They are busy working on our politicians, on our ministers, you know. So they created a local conflict The Chinese were also very active. The Russians were very active. So instead of Kanu remaining solid, now the president found himself being supported by two groups that were equally strong. So Tom Mboya came to know Bidona, and even the parliament became divided.
Those same colonial, forces, but now together with people from within Kanu and outside Kanu.
The fallout between Mzee Jomo Kenyatta and Oginga Odinga was gradual and began even before they realized it. In the run-up to 1963, the British started laying plans for their own exit and granting of independence to Kenya, and retired President Daniel Arap Moi, then the head of the Kenya African Democratic Union (KADU), was the man the British spies identified as the trusted pair of hands to have in a key position after independence. The British intelligence created good working relations between Moi and Mzee Jomo Kenyatta, leading to the dissolution of the opposition party KADU to join Kenyatta's KANU. Moi was appointed the minister in charge of Home Affairs. Upon the assassination of J.F. Kennedy in 1963, Moya's shine in the White House paled. Moi was the new darling.
The late Tom Mboya was equally ambitious, a capable leader, but I think in the order of things it was quite obvious the natural order of things would be that Jaramogi would be the natural successor. And of course, if you go to the records, Mboya himself was not terribly enthusiastic about the releases of Jomo Kenyatta. The person who really fought tooth and nail for his release was Jaramogi Odinga.
To the American intelligence, Jaramogi Oginga Odinga was a power-hungry politician who was working behind the back of the country's founding president to gain power. The West was checking the spread of communism and was not ready to lose the newly independent state to the East.
The two were played by international governments. Kenyatta, pro-West, Jaramogi, pro-East. And I think that is where the difference came from. I think they were also playing very dirty games through CIA from America and KGB from Russia.
The British and the Americans painted Odinga as Kenyatta's opponent. For 50 years, the Central Intelligence Agency CIA was the vanguard of America's Cold War against the Soviet Empire. Secrecy was their shield, covert operations their weapons. In Kenya, its strategy was to create divisions among leaders. This was easy for the CIA, given Jaramogi Oginga Odinga's links to the East. The classified documents show how the CIA painted Odinga as a deputy who undermined the leadership of his boss. By using overt and covert means, they destroyed the very fabric that held Kenyatta and Jaramogi together, and they forced the government to crumble.
The West at that time was not comfortable with Jaramogi Odinga. The only time they were comfortable with Jaramogi Odinga was when Kenyatta was in detention, when they had described Kenyatta as the leader of darkness and death. And they had this image of Kenyatta being a rebel and a communist, because they thought, having stayed in Moscow for a little while, that he was a fire-eating kind of revolutionary, and therefore anything should be done to stop him from becoming president. But we remember after that Nakuru meeting with the settlers, they were persuaded now that Kenyatta could become president or leader of an independent Kenya. And then now they the fires and the spears were turned against.
According to the CIA, Burudi Nabwera, then Kenya's ambassador to the US, was an Odinga ally. CIA documents declassified in 2008 states, as Minister of Home Affairs, he was able to remove a Kikuyu civil servant as head of the Passport Department and replace him with a loyal Luo. The Kenyan ambassador to the UN and US is an Odinga partisan, as is the Minister of Information, Acheng Oneko. According to the CIA, Jaramogi had packed the civil service with his cronies. They claimed he had doled out political ledgers in terms of scholarships and money to his supporters, and even sponsored political candidates into parliament and asked them to defeat some government motions. The documents also claim that Jaramogi had secret pacts with communist countries without Kenyatta's authority, including the training of his own private army.
There were a lot of supporters of very close people to Kenyatta who did not want Jaramogi. So in many cases, they started creating stories about Jaramogi, bringing in a firearms he wants to talk for Kenyatta. That was not very true.
In one of the documents prepared on July 31st, 1964, from the CIA's Office of Current Intelligence, and which was reviewed by the State Department, the CIA detailed instances it believed Jaramogi was plotting a power grab against Kenyatta. The Americans did not hide their disdain for Odinga, an assessment which they made in an intelligence analysis titled Independent Kenya's Prospects under Jomo Kenyatta, dated December 6, 1963, just 6 days to independence. Later that December, Jaramogi visited the US and became a darling of the civil rights movement that the US establishment loved to hate. Back then, a non-violent group of youth even composed a song in honor and praise of Jaramogi. In fact, renowned civil rights activist Malcolm X often quoted Jaramogi to motivate blacks to fight for freedom. The spies claimed then that Jaramogi was using his position as Home Affairs Minister and his position as the second in command within the ruling party KANU and his near total command over the Luo community to make a move. Oginga Odinga said then that he believed in the idea of non-alignment of the countries of the South.
Those who think of me like that are very wrong indeed. I only laugh at them because they are short-minded and they don't know what they're doing. Why I appear to be pro-East is because the weight has been so heavily overweighted on the western side, because Kenya has been under British and the Americans' influence here is also very strong. And in order to be neutral, I might appear as if I'm pulling the weight in order to balance it towards the East.
The documents read in part, Odinga has used these various sources of power interchangeably or simultaneously to operate just as he pleases, placing supporters where he wants them, running roughshod through the domains of other ministers and frequently presenting Kenyatta with accomplished facts which the latter is unwilling or unable to reverse. Within 3 years of independence, Kenyatta's policies were challenged by an opposition party led by some of his colleagues during the pre-emergency period.
When he formed his party of KPU, some of us had gone with him. Professor Julia had gone. What I told her not to go, because I knew what was happening in the government. And we knew Odinga was going to lose.
3 years later, the Kenya People's Union Party was banned. Oginga Odinga, its president and the man who had resurrected Kenyatta's name during the emergency, Bildad Kagia and Acheng Oneko, who had been sentenced with Kenyatta at Kapenguria and several other politicians were detained without trial. But it was a series of mysterious deaths of top politicians that escalated matters. A freedom fighter of the Goan descent, Pio Gamapinto, was the first to be assassinated, almost 365 days after the murder of Pinto. Followed a series of well-calculated moves to liquidate Jaramogi Oginga Odinga, then Vice President of Kenya, and the governing party, KANU. The man believed to have been behind the anti-Odinga scheme was Tom Mboya, the political genius who was for Jomo Kenyatta, Mr. Fix-It.
And if you look at the portfolio Jaramogi had at that time of independence, it was a very powerful portfolio he had. He was in charge of home affairs, which meant what is now internal security. And of course, the chemistry between the two leaders, both from Kenyatta's perspective and from Jaramogi's perspective, things were going to fall naturally into play.
But Tom Mboya did not last long after playing part in the removal of Oginga Odinga from the political equation. In 1969, he was gunned down after stepping out of a chemist along the current Moi Avenue Street.
The government began being suspected of killing politicians.
Hell broke loose in Kisumu when President Jomo Kenyatta visited the town to officially open the Nyanza Regional Hospital, which ironically now bears Jaramogi's name.
Then people wanted Kenyatta to explain where Mboya was. The aggressiveness of the laws was so strong that it was now approaching Mr. Kenyatta on the stage, on his stage. His security did not like it, because they started preventing them. So the security of Kenyatta pushed them and started firing in the air. The youths knew they were firing in the air. They came, they were pressing down this way. So they started, the security people shot at them. They killed quite a number. I was running away coming here to Bunyana. We passed quite a few fallen on that road. It is now called what? This is Kakumega Road. So we passed on them and they started, and the guards were shooting on the way to Nairobi, so they killed quite a number on the road. We in the cabinet ran away, those some went to their homes like me.
But upon the death of Mzee Jomo Kenyatta in 1978, Jaramogi Oginga Odinga acknowledged the difference between the two of them, but maintained that they remained family friends.